Hi there, my name is Jenna Giddens and we are here with Len Talks, which is Ted's little brother. I'm not quite ready for the TED Talk scene. As you can see, we're here in my living room. We're propped up with some lamps and my husband and my dog are in attendance. So I kind of feel like I'm the farm league for the TED Talks. So welcome to the first edition of Len Talks. Today we're going to be talking about interpretive leadership and my views of interpretive leadership. And I think as a foundation for all kinds of leadership, it has to do with caring. It's about caring for yourself, it's about caring for your team, and it's about caring for the visitors who come to your park. And how I demonstrate that I care is by being firm, fair, and fun with my staff. And the foundation for leadership, I think, is knowing yourself. You need to know the good, the bad, and the ugly. Occasionally we need to cast the light into those dark corners of ourselves and be brutally honest about what we find there. And sometimes you might not like it, but you need to understand yourself if you're going to lead people. And you also need to take care of yourself if you're going to lead people. And I really make an effort to try and take care of myself. I have a pretty good understanding of what I need before I go to work every day. I work out, I eat something really good, I spend some time with my dog, and I have coffee talk with my husband. He's my sounding board, and so every day we're bouncing ideas off of each other and rehashing yesterday and did I say the right thing, and maybe I need to do something different today. And so I think that it's really important as a leader to take care of yourself if you want to be effective in taking care of other people. And another thing that I've learned about myself by casting that light into those dark corners is that I have always wanted to be cool as a cucumber, and I am not. I am definitely more of a chili pepper. I remember when I was 5 years old in kindergarten, we made some kind of construction paper hat. It was President's Day, and it was something having to do with George Washington. I don't remember exactly, but I remember I came home from school that day and my mom made me mad, and I had a 5-year-old fit and I tore up my head into little pieces. And I remember distinctly being in our yellow bathroom in the corner, all balled up, having just boo-hooed my eyes out and looking at this pile of papers on the floor and thinking, oh my gosh, I can't believe I destroyed my cute little hat. And from that moment, in a 5-year-old brain, I understood that I needed to do something about my temper. And so I've been working on that my whole life. And even though I tend to be more like a chili pepper, and I'm, come from Eastern European stock, my friends and my husband joke, that I'm very stoic and serious on the outside. But inside I have this soft spot that my husband tells me is made of circus peanut goo. And that gooey spot sometimes makes it hard to be firm and fair with your staff. And understanding those challenges of leadership reminded me of this book that I read when I was in college. It's called Shibumi by Scott Trevanian. And I've read it a number of times since then. My grandmother gave me this book, and the protagonist in the story is capable of surviving these horrible things and still managing to do what needs to be done. And he asks this question, who must do the hard thing? And he answers with, he who can. And I've come to realize that it's not just he who can, but she who can. I've gotten a little more confident in my abilities and understanding that I have something to contribute. Even just 10 years ago when I was in law school, I got into this really great university, the University of Michigan Law School, and I used to joke that walking into the law quad, I felt smarter, like my IQ jumped just being there. But at the same time, I was always waiting for the tap on my shoulder for someone to come and tell me, like, hey, you don't belong here. But I made it through to graduation before anybody figured that out. But now I realize I feel like and have confidence in the fact that I have something to contribute. And sometimes what that contribution is being firm and fair with my staff when they need it. Being fair is hard. You don't always like everybody the same way. But being consistent is very important, and being firm when the situation calls for it. And that's hard for that gooey circus peanut goo part of me, for sure. Another thing that I've learned through my practicing leadership and being married to a man who was a former infantry soldier is something that he calls combat patience. and that is learning to let a situation unfold. You might, come up on a situation and not have all the information, not know exactly what's going on, and it's really important to just step back, take a moment, evaluate the situation, and see what's happening before you run headlong and say or do something that's maybe not so smart. And so I was never in the military, and I might not call it combat patience. I call it marriage patience. And what marriage has taught me is learning to listen and to speak when your audience is receptive. And I think that translates very easily into leadership. I want my staff to know that I'm there for them. And when they come in to talk to me, I stop what I'm doing, I turn away from my computer, and I give them my full attention. I try to be fully present for them, inviting them to sit down so that they feel comfortable talking to me about the good and the bad. And sometimes you need to say the good and the bad, and it's important to recognize when your audience is receptive and having a little patience and maybe waiting for a time when your audience is more capable of listening and hearing what you have to say. And through all of those challenges and my chili pepper nature, I really try and struggle with trying to be like a duck on the water. Here this duck is gliding along the water, looks very smooth, but maybe underneath there his little webbed feet are going a million miles an hour. And I try and do that. Nobody needs to know how furiously I'm working behind the scenes, as long as it looks like I'm gliding across, because in stressful situation, your team is going to look to you, and they're going to gauge their reaction off of your reaction. And if you're freaking out, or if you're, completely deflated, then they're going to take their cue from you. And so I think it's really important to try and be smooth and glide across that water, even when you're working furiously. Because, you don't want to have a leader who looks completely deflated when the situation looks bad or the situation is stressful. This is Jay Cutler. He's the quarterback for the Chicago Bears. I grew up being a Bears fan. It's kind of in my blood. My family's from Chicago, and my bubby was a huge Bears fan, although she would probably be disappointed in Jay in the way that he reacts under stress. Look at how deflated he looks. It impacts me watching this guy. I all of a sudden start to feel hopeless, like, oh my gosh, they're never going to win, they're never going to pull it out. And so I think he could maybe work on his appearance a little bit, his little attitude. Because I think the kind of leader that you want, the quarterback of the team that you want to have, is someone who's more like Tom Brady here. He is always in the fray. He stays in it, he's focused, he's making sure people are communicating and hearing what he has to say, no matter what's going on, and they fight until the end. And so that, I think, is a quality that I'm really working on and trying to have. And that's hard, because every day, all of us, we're always juggling. I feel like we're performing a juggling act. And so then the question is, what are you juggling? Are you juggling rubber balls or crystal balls? You need to be able to prioritize and identify which balls absolutely have to stay in play and which ones maybe you could let bounce or delegate to somebody else. Because it's always a juggling act, and keeping that in mind, the rubber balls and the crystal balls, being able to separate that, I think, is essential. And part of that, juggling those balls, involves understanding your team and what they need. How many balls are they juggling in their day? And I look at my staff and I think of them, and I think of myself this way too, kind of like as a stringed instrument. We need a certain amount of tension on those strings in order for the instrument to play properly. But if there's too much tension, then the string is going to break. But you need just that sweet spot where the tension in the orchestra is beautiful, so that we're making sweet music together. And part of the way that I try and keep that tension and push the envelope maybe is through career development, professional development opportunities with my staff. Getting them to think about what they want to learn and maybe pushing the envelope of their development so that they keep playing sweet music. And part of that understanding is having trust. When you're pushing the envelope with your staff, they need to trust you and you need to trust them. You need to have trust that they're actually going to be able to do it, and they need to trust that you're not throwing them under the bus. And this reminds me of a phrase that my mom has been telling me my whole life. She has always said that the two most important things a parent can give her children are roots and wings. And I think that translates into leadership really easily. the routes that we give our staff, we communicate, we're consistent with them, we work on collaborating with them, and then we give them room or the wings to fly and to try that out and understand that they're going to make mistakes and being okay with that. Let's come back, let's go back to the roots and see, oh my gosh, that was amazing, look at how you flew, you're like a peacock. And so having those roots and wings, I think, is very important with your staff. And then the idea of, well, maybe sometimes people don't want to make mistakes. They don't really want to test out their wings and fly. And so I was wondering if maybe we changed the way that we talk about interpretation. Instead of saying that we're interpreters and that we do interpretation, maybe we ought to think about it as practicing the art of interpretation. Lawyers have a practice, doctors have a medical practice. I read this really interesting quote once that said, if you change your words, you change your thoughts. If you change your thoughts, you change your life. And so maybe just adding this one little word to the way that we talk about interpretation could have huge impacts. And maybe it would make people more comfortable and willing to try new things and make mistakes and push the envelope of what we do with interpretation. I have no idea, but what I do know is that interpretation offers this really unique opportunity to have such a powerful and enormous impact on the people that we encounter. Recently, I was in Las Vegas visiting my family, and I came across this ad for a show at the Left of Center Gallery in Las Vegas. And this artist, Mari Lopez, the advertisement read, "Art as a vehicle for expression, empowerment, and exploration." And I took one of the little cards and I thought it was just such a fabulous idea. And I think that you could just as easily replace art with interpretation. And I did, and I made a little change. And I look at interpretation as a vehicle for inspiring, influencing, and impacting. Because that's kind of what we're all about. We are out there communicating with people, trying to provoke them to think differently and maybe behave differently. And when I think about how I try and influence and inspire and have an impact on people, I think about it in terms of planting seeds and building bridges, trying to plant new ideas in people's mind, expand the way that they think about the world, the natural world, and their interaction with it. And I'm completely fine with the idea that while I might have planted those seeds, I don't need to see the harvest of that bounty. I just like to know that the seeds have been planted. And some minds are more fertile than others, but still, we've made the effort to plant those new ideas. And the other way I like to think about it is building bridges. As interpreters, we are trying to connect our visitors with the resources that we have as a park. And sometimes people, you can lead them right up to the bridge and they are just not interested in crossing. But you might have had an impact just in exposing them to the idea that there is a bridge there and that they are somehow connected to these beautiful places. A few months ago, I was bored and I was flipping through YouTube and I found the video of Ray Lewis's, when he was on A Football Life. And in this video, Ray Lewis is a really intense guy. If you don't watch football, you might not know this, but he's very intense. And he was being interviewed and he was talking about his personal life. And he was talking about how he lives to make an impact. And the editors of the show did this really great job. Here he's talking about his life and his personal impact, and they show this video of him just plowing into somebody, the pads and the helmets slapping each other, and so right at that moment, he's talking about making an impact, and they show a physical impact similar to this image here. And I just love that idea of using interpretation to make an impact on people. And while we're not going to tackle our visitors like this, although there have been times when I might have wanted to, the idea is to have an impact on their mind and maybe the way that they think, and maybe the way that they do things. And here at Kenai Fjords, we are in a really unique situation to influence and inspire and impact our visitors. Our park is a little over half covered with ice, and you can see we have hundreds of miles of shoreline. And so we are in a unique position to be able to talk about climate change because they can see it. It's not this esoteric idea that might happen who knows when, if ever. It is happening, it is here, and people can see it. And two of the ways that we talk about climate change have to do with ocean issues and with glacial melt. And so here are some images of the beautiful creatures that we see here in our park, and talking about the changes in the ocean chemistry and how that's going to impact phytoplankton and on up the food chain. And while they're looking at this and maybe planting the idea that if we don't make some changes, there's the possibility that these kind of creatures won't be able to survive with the changing ocean chemistry. And it's a really powerful moment for people who have never seen a whale to be out there and experiencing this and wondering what the world might be like without them. And the other way that we talk about climate change is with our retreating glaciers or melting glaciers. And so this top image here is from 1909, and the bottom image is from 2005. And so we have a lot of repeat photography studies going on with the glaciers in our park and showing them these images, and then when they're there and they're looking and the glacier is melting. It's melting before their eyes. It's such a powerful moment for them. And even though this is a 100-year spread, we have some images of our glaciers where just a 5 or 10-year change is very noticeable, and so it makes a huge impact. But we do have some visitors who aren't quite there yet. Even with this right in front of them, they are not ready to hear about climate change. And so I think it's important that we recognize and mind that gap. So this is from the London Tube, or the London subway. A number of years ago, a really good friend of mine went to London and he brought me back this t-shirt that said, "Mind the gap." And I was like, what in the world is this? And apparently, all over London, as you step onto the subway, there's this little phrase here. It's all over the microphones, mind the gap, mind the gap. Well, I mean, it seems like it's only a few inches, but maybe Londoners are a little clumsy and they need to mind the gap. But in this context, I think that it's important to recognize and mind the gap between where we are talking about climate change and maybe where some of our visitors are. And maybe even between where I am as an interpretive leader willing to engage in climate change conversations and where some of my staff is. And so I was a little bit worried about that. And so this past summer, I created a training program for our seasonal staff. And I based it off of The Godfather, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. And it says, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. And in this context, enemies just means anyone who offers opposition to what you have to say. And so we created these role-playing sessions where our staff, they were forced to, in front of everybody else, in front of the rest of the staff, interact with each other, one as a park ranger and one as a climate change skeptic or denier, and kind of have a little interaction based on some of the ideas that are out there about climate change. And as you could probably guess, there were a lot of people on the staff who did not enjoy this session. I mean, there I was tightening the tension on that stringed instrument, and I was making them very uncomfortable. But then later in the summer, so many of them that didn't like the training session would come back to me and they'd be like, "Jenna, oh my gosh, I had this conversation with this visitor today, and this is how it went, and they were saying this, and I was saying this, and they I kind of like made them think about climate change differently, and what would you say in this situation?" So we'd have these really great conversations, and it was so fun for me to see their confidence level improve. And really, at the end of the day, that's, I think, what interpretation is about. It is about having fun. It is about having fun, watching your staff succeed, watching your peers succeed, and maybe seeing more success in the outfit, the National Park Service as a whole. And so I think it's really important to celebrate the small things and have fun. And this, you might have guessed I like football, is another football player. This is Clay Matthews. He's a linebacker for the Green Bay Packers, and he has an amazing skill for sacking quarterbacks. He might be leading the league right now. Anyway, when he gets a quarterback, he does his patented move called the Predator. And I love it when he sacks a quarterback because I'm always hoping he's going to do it. But I think that as an interpretive leader, it's important to celebrate the small successes with your staff. And so this is me celebrating one small success. This was our last ranger-led hike up the Harding Ice Field Trail this summer. And one of our interpreters there in the corner of the image, he's 65 years old, and he made this very rigorous hike 3 times that summer. And I was so excited, and I was joking around, and I did the Predator, and one of our visitors happened to capture this image and sent it to me. And there you see our interpreter. He's kind of looking at me like maybe I've lost my mind, but that's okay, because maybe maybe it's important to have your staff look at you sideways once in a while, just to keep them guessing. Thank you very much.